In a quiet, forgotten corner of a small New England town, there stood a creaking Victorian house with a story that would chill anyone who dared listen. It was the kind of house that seemed to sag under the weight of its own history, with ivy-clad walls and windows that stared out like hollow eyes. The townspeople avoided it, whispering about its dark past. But for one man, it was a beacon of opportunity. Henry Lawson was an aspiring writer, disillusioned with the mundane rhythm of his life. He was drawn to the house not by its eerie reputation, but by its isolation. Henry sought solitude to finish his novel, a psychological thriller he hoped would finally secure his place in the literary world. With its long corridors and shadowy corners, the house promised the perfect environment for his creative process. Little did he know, it was the perfect environment for something far more sinister. The first few days were uneventful, with nothing out of the ordinary to disturb the peace. Henry wrote diligently, his pen scratching across the paper, occasionally pausing to listen to the house's ambient sounds. The groan of settling wood, the whisper of the wind against the window panes, and the distant creaks that seemed to echo through the halls. But soon he began to notice something peculiar, something that made him pause more frequently. At night he would hear faint, almost imperceptible noises coming from the attic, a soft, rhythmic thumping, like footsteps pacing restlessly, as if someone was walking back and forth, unable to find peace. The sound was barely noticeable during the day, blending into the background, but it became impossible to ignore at night, growing louder and more distinct as the hours passed. Henry tried to dismiss it as the house settling, the creaks and groans of old wood shifting with the temperature changes, convincing himself it was nothing more than the natural sounds of an aging structure. But the sounds persisted, growing more insistent, as if something or someone was trying to get his attention, demanding to be heard, making it harder for Henry to concentrate on his work or find any peace in the house. One evening, armed with a flashlight and a sense of determined bravery, Henry ascended the narrow creaking stairs to the attic. The air grew colder with each step, the musty scent of age and decay intensifying. The attic door was heavy and reluctant, as if it had been sealed shut for years. When Henry finally managed to push it open, a chill ran down his spine. The attic was a cluttered mess of old furniture, forgotten trunks and piles of yellowed newspapers. Dust motes danced in the beam of his flashlight, creating eerie, ethereal patterns. He scanned the room but found nothing unusual, until he noticed an old, ornate mirror propped against the far wall. The mirror seemed out of place, almost as if it had been deliberately hidden there. The mirror was covered in a thick layer of dust, but as Henry wiped it clean, he saw something that made his heart race. The more he wiped, the clearer the reflection became, revealing details he wished he hadn't seen. Reflected in the mirror was a shadowy figure standing behind him, a figure that wasn't there when he turned around. It was as if the mirror held a different reality, one where this ominous presence existed. The air grew frigid, and Henry's breath became visible. The temperature drop was sudden and unnatural, sending chills down his spine. The figure in the mirror seemed to be staring directly at him, its eyes hollow and dark. Those eyes seemed to bore into his soul, filling him with an inexplicable dread. Panicked, Henry spun around, but the attic was empty. The silence was deafening, amplifying his fear. The mirror, now covered in a fresh layer of dust, showed only his own wide-eyed reflection. It was as if the shadowy figure had never been there, yet the fear lingered. The rhythmic thumping noise had ceased, replaced by a profound silence that seemed almost oppressive. The silence was so thick it felt like a physical weight pressing down on him. Shaken, Henry returned to his room, unable to shake the image of the shadowy figure from his mind. Every creak and groan of the old house seemed to echo with the presence of that eerie figure, making it impossible for him to find peace. Over the next few days, the occurrences intensified. The noises grew louder, more erratic, as if something was trying to break free from the attic. Henry's dreams became filled with fragmented images of the mirror and the figure. He would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding, feeling as if he had barely escaped some unseen terror. Desperate to understand what was happening, Henry began to research the house's history. What he discovered was deeply unsettling. The house had once belonged to the Whittaker family, who had lived there over a century ago. The father, Charles Whittaker, was a reclusive man who had become increasingly disturbed in the last years of his life. Neighbors spoke of strange noises and sightings of a shadowy figure. The family eventually vanished without a trace, leaving only the house and the legend of a ghostly presence in the attic. As the days passed, Henry's mental state deteriorated. The boundary between reality and his imagination began to blur. The figure in the mirror appeared more frequently, its eyes following him with a malevolent gaze. He found himself unable to write, paralyzed by fear and paranoia. His isolation became his torment, and the relentless thumping from the attic continued unabated, driving him to the brink of madness. One night, in a final, desperate attempt to confront whatever haunted the attic, Henry returned to the mirror. He found himself drawn to it, compelled by an inexplicable urge. As he stared into its depths, the shadowy figure seemed to reach out toward him, its form growing clearer. Henry's reflection twisted and warped, merging with the figure's dark outline. The air around him became suffused with a cold, malevolent energy. The following morning, the house was silent, an eerie stillness hanging in the air. Henry's neighbors, worried by his extended absence, went to check on him. They had not seen him for days and feared the worst. They found him in his writing room, staring blankly at the typewriter, his face a mask of terror. The room was filled with unfinished manuscripts and scattered papers. His once sharp mind had fractured under the strain of his experiences. The horrors he had faced had left an indelible mark on his psyche. The attic door remained slightly ajar, creaking in the breeze as if mocking the man who had dared to confront the darkness within. It was a constant reminder of the unknown terrors that lurked in the shadows. Henry Lawson was taken to a mental institution, his condition deteriorating further with each passing day. The doctors could do little to alleviate his suffering. He was haunted by the figure in the mirror, forever trapped in a nightmare of his own making. The ghostly apparition seemed to follow him everywhere, a relentless tormentor. The house, now abandoned once more, stood as a silent witness to the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. Its once vibrant rooms were now filled with an oppressive silence, a testament to the tragedy that had befallen its last occupant.